morning, everybody. So I'm gonna just kind of introduce myself and pull it all up all at the same time. My name is Temptaous McCoy. I am a second-year PhD student at East Carolina University. These lovely women here are my cohorts. We all came into the battlegrounds together. So it's really good to be here, trying to get all this great work that we do done. My primary research focus is diversifying the field of TPC through HBCUs. However, I also really have a heart for, the African American female body experience and embodiment as an African American woman. So today, I would like to chat with you guys about understanding intersectionality through the African American woman HBCU experience. So HBCUs can serve as a space for intersectionality by default. It's a space where different cultures can come in and everyone can get an education. However, before I move too far into our presentation, I want to make sure I take notice that not all women may have the same HBCU experience. So I like to acknowledge that all women HBCU graduates may not have had nor agree with the HBCU experience that I reviewed. However, I think that it is a crucial part of how intersectionality as a whole operates, and the idea, notion, and definition of intersectionality is dependent upon the embodiment experience of the user itself. So we have to make sure that we keep these things in mind as we decide to chat about intersectionality and how it operates. So a lot of the things that I mentioned in this presentation may just come from my personal experience as an HBCU grad. I talked to Cece here, my cohort, about her experience as an HBCU graduate. In addition to, I like to mention that intersectionality continues to be an ever-evolving framework, ideology, analytical tool, and theory that calls the structures of power to the floor and acknowledge their presence and, in a sense, challenges them. I like how intersectionality, we can make claims for things and we can say how it works, but it also calls to the floor what binds these things or what blocks these things up. And I like to analyze intersectionality as a key component of social justice rhetoric that is oftentimes overlooked or does not receive the credit that it is due. So granted, it is grounded or can be thought to be shaped by critical race theory, I think intersectionality as a research paradigm can stand on its own. And I've done some research following that as well, where some people really disagree with that. They believe that intersectionality that is ever evolving, but for myself, in regards to how it can stand on its own or be built upon, I think it is very strong in that sense. In addition to, as an HBCU graduate, I went to Elizabeth City State University. I have discovered that my opportunities, my views have all been shaped tremendously due to my HBCU attendance. I approach texts assigned to me differently. I alter the way in which I enter a space, and I'm less likely to doubt my black girl magic. For those who may not know, a recent movement that acknowledges the achievement of black women. HBCUs serve as space to provide education to African American women who possibly would have been denied the same opportunity in other spaces. The opportunity to discover their personal ideas or individualism, also referred to as the development of womanist ideologies, and as well as understanding of community and unity while teaching African American women to display their black girl magic. So those are the three key things I want to make sure that we can kind of jump into here today. So first thing would be, again, the educating of the African American woman at the HBCU, the opportunity to understand their own personal identity, their individualism, their social justice approaches, all of those great things, and as well as understanding the sense of community in their black girl magic. So those are the three key things we're going to try to make sure we get to today. Now, of course, we have to give you guys a little bit of background. For those who did not know, North Carolina is home to the vast majority of historically black colleges and universities. They are home to 12 of them. Out of those 12, 11 of them are accredited by SACS, and we're all in the UNC system together, kicking it together. You got how to go. So the purpose of the HBCU has been and continues to be a space to provide culture-specific pedagogy, officially defined by Congress as an institution whose principal mission was and is the education of black Americans that were established before 1964. So if you ever look at the mission statements and the founding dates for HBCUs, you'll typically see them right at that turn of that little century there. That's where they're all happening at. And the first was actually, and I've always destroyed this, Chenault University, having been found in 1837. Initially, that institution was named the African Institute, and then the name was changed to the Colored Youth Institute, and then it was turned to the Sinead Training School for Teachers, then it was changed to the Teaching College, and then it finally just stayed the Sinead State College and University of Pennsylvania. So you guys see here already, even in just name changes, how these institutions are operating as spaces of intersectionality. In addition to that, in the early 1990s, these are some quick statistics. HBCUs were responsible for educating nearly 40% of America's black college graduates, 80% of black federal judges, 85% of all black doctors, 75% of all black PhDs, and 50% of black engineers, and 46% of all business professionals. That was in the 1990s. Now in 2015, HBCUs accounted for an overall 22% of bachelor degrees awarded to African Americans, and among those HBCU graduates include 40% of all congressional representatives, 12.5% of CEOs, 40% of engineers, 50% of professionals at HBCUs, and 50%, non-HBCUs, and 50% of lawyers, and 80% of judges. So we can see, again, that HBCUs still have work that they continue to do, regardless to how one may feel about them or may question if their existence is still worthy. We can still see here that they're continuing to do their work. This picture that we have here is actually from Elizabeth City State University, and from 1891 to 1928, the institution's enrollment increased from 23 students to 355 students, and their faculty went from 2 to 15. Elizabeth City State University was initially founded as a teaching school. It wasn't a college initially, and then it slowly transferred into a university, but it initially was a school to educate teachers, primarily women. That's why you might see more women in that picture. Most of those gentlemen were the actual instructors, which I've always found very ironic. I thought that was your hand. Girl, it's like your hair. Girl, so, educating, it just threw me off. I was like, what is it? 6 minutes? But educating the African American woman. So while historically spaces of higher education were initially spaces for white males, where they served as student, faculty, and administrators, HBCUs became the space to allow for the education of African American women, who oftentimes were placed below, at the bottom, under white women in regards to education. These institutions allowed women to combat their double minority position as female as well as minority. But by 1953, only 3 HBCUs intended to educate women remained: Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, Barbara Scotia in Concord, North Carolina, and Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a little asterisk there by Barbara Scotia because in 1953, I believe it was, they began to enroll men as well. So their mission began to change. And if you want to look at the history or thinking about the history of Spelman College, the first set of students was made up of former slaves and their daughters, and it was only 11 in total. Yet by 1891, the student population had grown from 11 to 800 instructors, and it was valued over at $90,000. So Spelman is one of the top colleges that when you typically think of HBCUs, mine kind of goes to Spelman, Howard, Morehouse, those schools as well. And these schools all have somewhat of the same principles and ideas. Now, in 1953, Spelman was accredited as being the second leading baccalaureate origin institution for black women science doctoral recipients. So again, we can see here that HBCUs are playing a critical role in educating African American women, not only from the past, but we're also seeing it still today. Moving forward, the African American woman continues to carry the responsibility, uplift, and improvement of their race through her education, even though this expectation does not apply to white women. So African American women, we're expected to go to school, learn something, and then take that thing that you've learned, now use it to change your community. We don't see the same burden placed on white women. In taking on multiple roles and multifaceted identities, while being a scholar, African American women have taken on the ideology of intersectionality even before its creation or before we decide to, stamp it with its name itself. And HBCUs has taken up the responsibility to ensure African American women are educated and powerhouses in the call for change in not only academic spaces, but social spaces as well. So HBCUs allow for that social change to happen, but as well teach you how to make that change occur. Also, the womanist ideologies here, and I'm going to just jump through some of these, you guys. So, a list of some names that I think are really important for us to remember. Ida B. Wells went to Fisk University. Rosa Parks, Alabama State. Federal Judge Norma Holloway Johnson, the University of the District of Columbia. Oprah, yes, child. Oprah went to HBCU. Tennessee State University, and Miriam Wright Edelman went to Spelman, are all graduates of HBCUs that have gone on to enact social change, as well as global from a womanist approach. So when we're looking at the definition of womanism, the one thing that I've grabbed on, I love it so much, that it takes into account the different experience that African American women may have, that sometimes the feminist approach may lack, or sometimes that you may have to add on to. Womanist approach comes from Alice Walker, again, who was a Spelman graduate, who first utilized the term in her work In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. The term may come with different variations of its definitions. However, these are the two that come straight from me, especially the committed to survival and wholeness of male and female, not a separatist except for periodically for health. But we're just going to stick to that part, though. We're going to stick to that one part. So utilizing and teaching womanist ideologies at HBCUs allow African American women to enact change and engage with their communities without having to disengage with their personal embodiment. It's fine for, at HBCU, Black African American women are able to identify as being a woman of color as well as a woman in general. And one thing that I myself have had to resonate with, I think it was this when we were celebrating Women's History Month, I had to have a talk with myself, like, do I jump on the fact that I'm a Black woman, or do I jump on the fact that I'm Black? Like, how do I acknowledge, like, women's history? Like, having that mental battle with myself of how do I approach these types of things. Diversity of faculty, opportunities to enact with different female groups, and the availability to explore one's identity allows these institutions to continue as intersectional spaces of identity. And then finally, Black Girl Magic. So the space in which I was able to find myself at SU, I refer to as showcasing of Black Girl Magic. So I was able to join the plus size modeling troupe, walking around sashaying all up and down the runway. I can't do nothing now. I'm like 5'4" now, so I ain't gonna do nothing. I became a radio DJ. I was radio host for 4 years. I was able to interview celebrity guests, and I expanded my resume in several other spaces while enrolled. And I was also encouraged to live in the light of my Black Girl Magic, constantly reminded that my success is not limited to just my HBCU. I was able to know, like, hey, you can go out and continue to do whatever it is that you want to do, but it's not limited to just this HBCU space. And following the structure of community at HBCUs, Black Girl Magic allows for the support structure to remain constant. African American women make up the majority of HBCU campuses, thus requires additional support and acknowledgments amongst fellow students. So again, we can see here that HBCU spaces again provide support. They allow African American women to continue to be themselves, and it allows them to foster and grow. Final implications, right on top, right? Also, the reviewing of the HBCU through an intersectional lens provides an opportunity to develop and curate new research that will fundamentally work to the betterment of HBCUs. African American women who make up the majority of HBCU campuses thus requires additional support and acknowledgement amongst fellow students. So I want to reiterate that point. Like, as myself, coming from an HBCU, moving into a PWI space, a predominantly white institution, I realized that I needed additional support in spaces that I simply could not receive from my faculty. There were just some things that my faculty did not get. Luckily for me, I got CC. We sit in each other's office and cry a little bit. Like, those things happen, you know. And then to effectively analyze HBCUs in their presence of intersectional theory, it is important to recognize specific structures of power and how they are limiting within the HBCU space. And I thank you all for your time.